Yeah, never assume you know the answer to a question.
So, not, first of all, I make sure that I just am asking questions.
To clarify, like never assume you know the answer to a question you are asking a client. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that something else that can happen is that we can learn in school when people do X, Y, and Z, it tends to be for this, this, and this reason.
Right.
Or, everybody's motivated by this belief. Or you've just sat in front of a lot of clients and feel like you start to know. But some of the best advice that I was ever given early on was like, never ask a question you think you know the answer to. And ultimately, don't assume you know the answer to a question, that you don't know what's going to happen in front of you. And coming from a place of assuming is never helpful to the client.
Well, like we saw so painfully with the therapist that you had a bad experience with. This person painted a picture of who you were and stuck to that despite evidence to
Yeah.
the contrary. And so they would ask you questions and you would answer it honestly, and then they would challenge the question. Are you sure that that's right? Even
Yeah.
because it was contrary to the image they had created of you in their own mind.
Yes. So the big heading here is like to stay curious. I think that these are good relationship things as well. That sometimes when you're like with a partner for a long time, you might start to assume that you know the answers to things. You assume that you know why they did something or how they thought about something. And it's really important in any relationship, but especially when you're in a long term relationship and you start to feel like you know that person,
Yeah.
stay curious about who that person is. And that's really, really important as a therapist, too.
It's not an acronym, but it's in the same. I don't know the right terminology for this, but like by golly, stay curious could be like by gall, stay cure, or really we could shorten it even further and just say stay bi curious.
It's like, where is this going?
Nobody knew where it was going. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay. I worked with somebody who was a project manager at an insurance company where you're in good hands. And but I'll never say which one. And her motto for project management was only ask questions you already know the answer to. When you're meeting with people who are working on the projects that you're managing, ask questions you already know the answer to.
Yeah.
What she really meant was try to catch people lying to you.
Yep.
And that's what she lived for.
It was all about power and control, that she wanted to go into a meeting and put everybody in their place. And that's the other thing that happens when you ask questions you think you already know the answer to, is that you're trying to get them to say something, or to catch them in a lie. And it's so uncomfortable. It's such a control tactic.
It's a control tactic, and it's what I saw was it's excruciatingly ineffective in a workplace because you're going into this like with a combative attitude.
Yeah.
So the people who are supposed to be on your fucking team working with you on the fucking project are now like, wait, you're an adversary?
Right.
We're against each other?
Yeah.
And so people were like,
I thought you were here to help me.
Yeah. And then eventually she became like super ineffective at her job because everybody hated her. And like, heads up, like people have to like working with you for you to be effective as a project manager. Sorry, hate to say it. It's extremely inappropriate to take that mindset in a therapeutic scenario because there is already an imbalance of power.
Yeah.
As the therapist, you wield so much power that to assume that you know the answer to a question and ask those questions to like catch people or to like lead people to a certain endpoint is just, you're gonna get bad results, and you're operating kind of in bad faith at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that a common one is asking that, like, is it helpful for you to do this thing? And I started realizing that people would say yes to that. It was kind of a question I was taught to use. Is it helpful when you like yell at your partner? Is it helpful when you do this thing? That the obvious answer, right, is that like, no, of course it's not helpful.
Right.
And people would say yes to things that I thought the right answer was to say no to, that they're supposed to, I don't know, have a realization about that. Because people are doing the thing that they think is helping. Yes, it helps me when I yell at my partner. He doesn't listen if I'm not yelling. Yes, it helps me to do this thing. It's the only way I can cope. Yes, it helps me to do that. It's the only way that I feel like And so getting to like come to every question with curiosity, with genuine curiosity. And if you catch yourself starting to think that you do know the answer to something, remember that that's an opportunity to ask, that it's not helpful for you to have made that assumption. And when you're offering up stuff to a client, you can say things like, I hear it can be common when you're dealing with that to feel isolated, or that sounds like it might feel really isolating. Does it feel that way to you? Instead of saying, yeah, it is this thing when that happens.
Oh my God, that's so isolating. It's very different than that must be isolating.
Yeah. Does it feel that way to you? Is that your experience?
Especially when I first started therapy and I didn't know much about how it worked, she could have said, like, and the sky is red. And I'd be like, yeah, it is. I don't want to be here. I'm uncomfortable. Whatever you say is correct about me. Whatever you say about my life is true, Yeah. Oh, you sound like a very angry person. Like, I must be. You're the expert. There's so much power there.
Yeah.
And how you use it is super important.
And so it's really wasted time for me to tell somebody how they feel, because they'll probably, like you said, they'll probably agree with me, and that's not helpful. Now we're on the wrong track. Now they're trying to come up with reasons to validate having agreed with me, instead of like actually exploring what's going on.
Yeah. I am looking at a cornfield right now, and this is the mental image. Just buckle in and go with me here. This is the mental image that I'm coming to, okay? Sometimes out in these woods, there are like deer trails. Mm-hmm. They're a little easier to walk through because, game is gone back and forth there. You're trying to get to a specific destination in the middle of the cornfield, right? And only the person you're following knows how to get there. Well, if you have just wildly made little trails through it that have nothing to do with the actual destination, that person might go down those trails because they're a little easier to navigate, but it doesn't actually get you to like where you're trying to go. This is a bit of a stretch, but that's what I'm thinking. Like, if you try to pave the way for them to arrive at a certain conclusion, they might actually get to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. Get to something that feels right because it feels like where their therapist was leading them, but it's not actually the spot we were meant to get to.
So to me, like, never ask a trick question and never assume you know the answer to a question feel they're
very much related.
Because it's all about you as the therapist assume you know everything about the client.
Yep.
And even if you do, you deny them the opportunity to come to those conclusions themselves.
Absolutely. And that's the whole thing, is that it's empowering the person in front of you to be the expert in their own life and to be the one able to tell their own story and all of those things that are so important to us as humans.
When so often they're not even maybe telling themselves that story, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that was my reality going into therapy, is I wasn't like consciously aware of all of the things that were plaguing me. Yeah. And if my therapist had just sat me down and been like, you're dealing with this, you're dealing with this, you're dealing with this, it wouldn't have been nearly as effective as me actually kind of coming to those conclusions and conquering those things myself with the helping hand of a therapist who like guided me there, or encouraged me to that place,